I think I couldn't really hear, but I think it was everybody talks about education, but what would you specifically do to fix it? Was that what you? Oh, higher education. Well, I think that in terms of the federal government's role, I think we can use the funds that we have, the grants and the loans that we have, to incentivize institutions of higher ed to reduce their costs, to hold down their costs. Right now, there's no incentive structure for that. In fact, it works in exactly the opposite way. However the costs rise, we find a way to cover it with student loans, and I think we're contributing to the problem. We shouldn't be. Well, I agree, we should not be doing that. It's because of for the reasons that was stated by the guy downstairs with respect to Sally Mae. We have to fix it. Over here, anybody? Yes.
Yeah, I have a question. Whether we're talking about innovation or higher education, in the end, as you referenced, it all comes down to our access of information. And unlike Europe, America just rewrote some rules about net neutrality. And I just want to know your opinion on that, and if you think we're headed in the right or wrong direction.
Well, I saw what the FCC had done yesterday. I was reading it on the airplane on the way back, so I have not had the opportunity to dig down on it. I want to make, I'd like it to be have as much open accessibility as we can have, but I want to see what they thought they were doing. So let me get back to you on that. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you for being here. Can you speak to the impact of the medical device tax had on one of the most productive sectors of the U.S. economy as it relates to import?
I honestly, the medical device industry has been doing really, really well. I support a repeal of the medical device tax because I don't think it makes sense to be taxing revenue, especially for companies that aren't making profits. But I think it would be an overstatement to say that it has made us uncompetitive with the rest of the world. So I support the repeal, but I also want to be candid about my view. I don't want to get accused of saying one thing in one place and one thing someplace else.
With such a mobile population, what is your view on the role of the federal government in K-12 education standards?
With such a...
People move all over the country all the time, yet there's such inequality and different standards in every community and every state.
Yes.
What is the role of the
Look, I think we've actually gotten to a good place on this. The question is, what's your role of the federal government in terms of standards for K-12 education, because we have such a mobile population? Well, for lots of other reasons too, because we need to make sure we're benchmarking against international norms. We need to make sure that we're not fooling kids and families and saying, you know what, you're getting a good education when you're not actually getting a good education. And because we're in a federal system, and because not nobody, but virtually nobody wants the federal government to be a national school board, I agree with that. Because we only 9% of what we spend on K-12 is federal, the rest is state and local. What we did was we had a bunch of states come together in a consortia and create something called the Common Core, a set of standards that were benchmarked to international norms that are now being called Obamacare by people. And when I was talking downstairs about people wasting other people's time by making stuff up, this is a classic case. The federal government didn't create the Common Core. States that were interested in making sure we weren't kidding ourselves about what our kids were able to do were creating the Common Core. And we are actually implementing in Colorado something called the Colorado standards that I think are much better than the standards that we had before. If somebody wants to resist the standards on the merits, I'm more than happy to have that conversation. But simply calling it Obamacare and saying it's another Bolshevik plot to take over the United States of America is not a particularly helpful analysis, especially when it comes to our kids. You know, we are doing nothing, not nothing. There is so little in our incentives, in the incentives and disincentives in our K-12 system that are related to the outcomes that we want for kids in this country. Just take one example and I'll stop, but I just impose on you. Actually, I'm going to impose on you on two things. One, on K-12, we have done absolutely nothing to change the way we train teachers, hire teachers, inspire teachers, retain teachers, since we had a labor market that discriminated against women and said, you've got two professional choices. One's being a teacher and one's being a nurse. And we use that labor market to subsidize K-12 education. It hasn't been true for 40 years, but the system that we're running is still the same. There was a question about higher ed over here, but a specific on K-12 is we better figure out how we're going to attract the next million teachers to the classroom in this country, because the way we're doing it right now is not working. You can see models of what will work in Denver, which, by the way, is now the fastest growing urban school district in the United States of America. And it's not because of the school-age population is growing that fast. It's because families are coming back because it's working for more and more families. There's a lot more for us to do. We have a long, long way to go. But 30% more kids graduated this year and went to college than in 2005. And a lot of that has to do with the way we're bringing teachers to the school district. The second thing I wanted to impose on you before I leave, or before I take the last couple questions, is immigration reform. I was part of the Gang of Eight, 4 Democrats and 4 Republicans, that negotiated the immigration bill that passed the Senate with almost 70 votes. And when people are feeling depressed and discouraged about the lack of leadership in D.C. and the inability to actually get anything done, what I tell them is, in my view, the model of legislative leadership I've seen in the 5 years I've been there was the leadership provided by John McCain, Jeff Flake, Marco Rubio, and Lindsey Graham, the 4 Republicans that sat at that table for 8 months, knowing what some in their party would say about them being there, and still doing it because it was the right thing to do for the country and the right thing to do for their party in that order. And that bill has not been touched by the House of Representatives. And they've said, well, we should pass it piece by piece. They've made no effort to do that. They've said that it's all, we have failed to secure the border. John McCain and Jeff Flake are both Republican senators from Arizona, a border state. The single most important issue to them is border security. And this is incredibly important to Colorado, to the University of Colorado, to our bioscience community, to our ag community, to our high-tech community, to our ski resorts, to the people that are in our country right now and in our state that are working every day but are living in a cash economy that's benefiting no one to the degree that it could. This bill, the Congressional Budget Office says it will add 3 points of GDP growth in the first 10 years, 5 points in the second 10 years. It reduces the deficit by $900 billion, and we can't get anybody's attention in the House of Representatives. So I wish you would get somebody's attention in the House of Representatives so we could get this bill passed. That's it for my commercial. Thank you. Yes, one more.
Okay. I'd like to ask you about NIH funding. So we're in year 4 of pay lines around 10 to 12 percentile. This is under a Democratic president with a Democratic majority in the Senate. We thought that was unthinkable. What is the Democratic caucus doing?
So you'll remember, did everybody hear the question? The question was about NIH funding. We never thought we'd see these levels. This is under a Democratic president and a Democratic Senate. What is the Democratic caucus doing? Let me address it as what are we doing as a country, and then maybe I'll come back to the Democratic caucus. This falls into that category of Bolshevik plot again, for some people who have said that the market, their answer to your question, the opponents of NIH, the answer to their question is let the market figure it out, let the private sector figure it out, completely ignoring the history of this country's commitment to basic research and science and leadership in basic research and science and need for it. And the people that come to lobby me on this are not Bolsheviks. They are, in many cases, business people that are saying, we need this funding at NIH. You may remember, I've tried to cleanse my memory of it, but there was this thing called the fiscal cliff a couple years ago. And at 2:30 in the morning, a deal was struck, the deal was struck earlier in the evening. At 2:30 in the morning is when we took the vote. And the vote was to allow certain Bush tax cuts to expire, not allow other Bush tax cuts to expire, and to delay the sequester by 90 days. The sequester is the across-the-board cuts that actually now is resulting in what you're talking about. There were 8 no votes that night, and I was one of 3 Democrats who voted against that deal, because not only were we not solving our problem, but we were doing it on terms that I thought, I don't care whether Democrat or Republican, lousy terms for the American people. And I say that not even knowing that 90 days later, the sequester, which had been designed to be so ugly and so hideous that it would never become law, became the law of the land. If you had polled the Senate that night and said, will the sequester actually go into effect in 90 days, 90 of 100 of us would have said no, and we would have been wrong. Because the Tea Party guys got exactly what they wanted, which was the across-the-board cuts that took place 90 days hence, and now we find ourselves in the position that we're in, which is, you know, we have to take these people on. Yeah, but his budget has to reflect the top. Look, I voted against it. His budget has to reflect the top line budget deal that's been agreed to, and I agree with your sense of urgency about this. It's a huge problem for us not to fund NIH. It's a huge problem, and what we need to understand is that this ugly fight that you're seeing back there, and people want to say it's a pox on everybody's house, is not a fair fight. Because if you have been sent there, you believe, you've been sent there to dismantle the federal government. That's your job, your assignment. Nothing else matters. That's it. That's it. Then you don't care how degraded the place becomes. You don't care whether we have a 9% approval rating. You don't care whether it goes down to 4.5%. You don't care whether we have one more idiotic, stupid waste of time on a budget battle, or you don't care whether you threaten the credit rating of the United States of America. You don't care about any of that stuff. The rest of us care. And it's not all Republicans. It's this group that's been sent there to dismantle the federal government. We have to have a conversation with the American people about priority setting. Look, there's no local government in Colorado, or I see that you're from Wisconsin, none would get away with the idea that you could pass a continuing resolution instead of a budget, or that would allow you to shut the government down because you had a dispute about the last 5% of what ought to be dealt with, or threaten there's not a superintendent in America that could threaten their credit rating for politics. Yet we've allowed that to happen in Washington. We have allowed it to happen because we haven't held people accountable to coloring inside the lines. And I'll stop with this on infrastructure, just because it's another example. We don't even have the decency to maintain the infrastructure and the assets that our parents and grandparents built for us. They had the decency to build for us, much less build the infrastructure our kids are going to need in the 21st century. And whatever one wants to blame the president for, that's not his fault. There are plenty of people that want to do that on both sides of the aisle. But we've got to find a way to close over these people that are just making it up. This is a coloring book version of what the Founding Fathers want. If you listen to these guys talk, you would think that the Founding Fathers were engaged in dismantling a country, not creating a country. There was no reason for them to meet if they weren't trying to assemble a country. And they had much larger compromises to make than we do. There were people there, as you know, that believed in slavery, and there were people there that were wanted to emancipate the slaves. But they were able to come to agreement on stuff to get something done. And all you hear back there is that compromise is a dirty word. That's how we've run our government since the beginning. So I'm sorry to leave on kind of a down note, and I can see that I got to go. So, let me just say, no. Let me just say this. We are, as a country, in incredible shape. It's just our politics that has to catch up to where we are. In Colorado, I've spent the last 5 years visiting companies that have added jobs during the worst recession since the Great Depression, and it gives a person incredible confidence in the future of our state and the future of the country. Thanks for letting me be here today.
Don't go away. I know you have to go. So I want you to clap for him again as a former Bolshevik who proudly wore that somehow. I'm inspired to not give up on politicians, independent of parties, because you were great. So thank you, and come back next year.